Now would be an excellent time to do your handlebars on your bike. If you'll notice on this bike over here, this is not the Vulcan, but I've put about 2 layers of towels over the gas tank. If you're going to do your handlebars with the tank on the bike, make sure you put towels and really protect that tank, because you don't want to ruin that paint job when you drop something on it. So anyway, let's pan over to the Vulcan here. Okay, what we want to do first is remove these clips that hold the wires. There's one on each side. And then go ahead and disconnect these little switch, or the little wires coming out of the switches. These just pull out of the housing there. You can, when you do those back, you don't need to put them on any certain side. And then on this side, there's a wire. And this one has a little clip on the bottom side. You just push that little clip down and it'll undo itself there. So go ahead and undo the switches, the cables, and then we'll get started. I like to undo my clutch cable so that I don't have to deal with the clutch housing hanging on the cable. So what I do is run the adjusters all the way in, and then while I pull the clutch lever, and while I pull back on the cable, it'll pop out of the housing like that. So then you can just rotate that out and take that out. So go ahead and do that, and then we'll continue on. Okay, to remove this switch housing, there's just a screw in the front, top and bottom. So take those screws out, and this will just separate and come off. I like to put the screws back in just so I don't lose them. And then let's go ahead and loosen the clutch bolt right here, and it'll slide up to the front of the bar there. And then I've slid the screwdriver under the grip, and I was able to pry that off. What I do is I put a little solvent under there, like a little paint thinner or something, as you slide the screwdriver and pry it, and it should come off. Because these are pretty nice grips. I think I'm going to try to reuse these. So go ahead and do that, and then you can go ahead and slide the clutch lever off, and then we'll do the right side. To remove the brake lever, go ahead and just pop these little chrome covers off here, and then that'll expose the Allen screws, and then just remove those Allen screws, and that brake lever will release there, and we'll just let it hang down by the bike. The last thing we want to do to remove the handlebars is to undo the screws on the throttle housing like that, so it's loose. Now that won't slide off without removing the handlebars, so now's the time to go ahead and unbolt the handlebars. There's some chrome caps on these Allen screws here. Just pop those off the little screwdriver, and then go ahead and remove those screws, hold on to the handlebars, and as you lift the handlebar off, just slide the throttle housing off, and then we're ready to install our drag bars. Next, let's do the throttle installation. Now if you're going to keep the stock throttle on your bike, throttle grip and everything, just ignore this part of the video. Now if you're going to change the grips out with either our Avon or another brand of grip, go ahead and glue the little cam on the Avon grip as they suggest, and while that's drying you can go ahead and do all this other stuff. So anyway, this is the throttle housing. I've taken off the back side on it, just slip that off over the wire, and what I've done is I've loosened this nut right here. Go ahead and loosen that up so this will swivel, and then I've loosened these 2 lock nuts on the adjustment part of the cables, and I've go ahead and run those adjusters all the way down this way. What that'll do, that'll loosen the cables and give you the maximum amount of play in there, so you can take the throttle tube off out of the housing. So anyway, I'm going to rotate this around now that those adjusters are loose, and you can see there it's quite loose in there now. It's basically really simple. All you do is just kind of rotate the housing out of the tube out of the housing like that, and then go ahead and pry the cables out, just like that. And then let's go ahead and show you how to reinstall the new one. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the new throttle tube. This is the same one, but I'll pretend like it's a new one. Okay, just go ahead and put that cable in like that. Rotate that around. Then you'll have to go ahead and just kind of rotate with the tube out of the housing. Go ahead and pop that other cable in there, like that. And then you just rotate the housing, or the tube, back into the housing. Make sure I can do it here. Make sure the cables are wrapped around there. And there it is. So you should be able to go ahead and rotate that. And then let's go ahead and put the housing back together, and then we'll put it back on the bike. I've mounted the new drag bar in place here. If you'll notice, I've marked the center line with a piece of tape here. What I do is I just measure from the end to the center and put 2 marks, and then average them out, and that's how I get the center line. So I've marked that way, and then you'll notice I put the painted end to the left. The non-painted end goes to the right. The non-painted end is for the throttle. So let me pan around this way, and I'll show you how they mount onto the motorcycle. What you do is you just put these spacers under the regular clamp here. So just put the spacer and then the normal clamp that goes on top, and the handlebar right there. So, and then the longer bolts are included in the spacers. So that's how they mount on place. You go ahead and just mount those, cinch those down a little bit, because we don't want to necessarily angle the bar right now, but we can angle it up, you know, and then we'll droop it later. But we need to tighten it up a little bit so we can tap this clutch lever on the end there. So go ahead and mount the bars, and then we'll continue on. I slid the throttle housing and the throttle tube back on the motorcycle. There's a little pin in this housing on the front of the handlebar. Make sure that that little pin locates into the hole in the drag bar that we drilled for you. That's really important. And then go ahead and snug that up. And make sure that your cables and everything are routed properly. That's another thing that's really important. You don't want those twisted. So you may have to redo that and take that apart and redo that if they're twisted. So, and then if you'll notice, I've mounted the brake lever back in place. You can leave all this stuff a little bit loose if you want right now, because we're going to readjust it later. So go ahead and mount all that stuff like that, and then make sure this throttle snaps back, it's nice and loose. One of the reasons a lot of times that the throttles are loose is because the throttle cables need to be readjusted. What I do is I loosen these all the way to where I have the maximum amount of play, and then I'll readjust those. Sometimes that'll free the cables up so that they end up nice and loose, and you get that snap of that throttle. Let's go ahead and do the clutch side. Okay, now if you'll notice, I've sanded the paint off this end here. Make sure you sand that or file that so you get down to the bare metal like that, because that'll help that clutch lever slide on there. And then go ahead and mark a piece of tape on this end at 8 1/4 inches or 210 millimeters. I hope I've done my math right on that. So put a little piece of tape there, and then we'll slide all this stuff on there. I've wiped oil on this handlebar right here. Make sure you just put a little oil on there. And then before we slide the clutch cable lever on, let's go ahead and remove the screw. Go ahead and take that out. And then let's just slide that on there like that. And we may even have to give it a little tap with a rubber hammer or something just to get it started. So do that, and then we'll go ahead and slide that clutch lever all the way up to the tape. Before we continue, I want to overemphasize the fact that we need to not droop these bars down too low. Make sure they're tilted up, because if they turn real sharp and you have your tank on your bike, it'll hit the gas tank right here. So make sure that the bars are angled up for right now. I've mounted the switch housing back into place. You can leave all this stuff a little bit loose for now so we can adjust it later. And I've reconnected my clutch cable. Now, before you connect your clutch cable, you may want to take it out of this little wire hoop, because it needs to make a nice swoop under the triple clamp there. You don't want it to bind and get too tight a bend there. And then make sure you got plenty of play in there. We'll adjust all this later, but you can see how all this is nice and clean now. This is ahead of the clutch cable. Okay, one more quick view from this side. You can see how these throttle cables just kind of loop down and through the basket there. And this wire, we'll tie this up later, but make sure all this is nice and clean and it's not doubled over itself. Then we'll readjust things later.